Miss Martin Muses and another Civil War battle that we're going to be looking at. It is the anniversary of the Battle of Chancellorsville, and I have once again Dadmanwalking with me to talk about it.
Hello, welcome. I should say thank you for having me on.
It's
It's
all right.
cool to be back with you again. It's wonderful, wonderful. So always a pleasure to see, and great to talk about history, especially the U.S. Civil War, and especially a very pivotal battle. Uh, Even though the winner may have won, at what cost?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what we're going to find out today. In many ways, this is as pivotal, if not more, than the Battle of Gettysburg from a certain point of view.
Hmm.
So, yeah, we're going to be getting there. But before we do, let's say hi to everyone. It is Corey Cochran. Hello. Thank you for being here. It is Mrs. Dadman Walking. Thank you for
Hello.
being here. It is Keely Chow. Hello, Keely Chow. And Snorta Poopus Cooper. We love our animals here at Miss Martin Muses. And let's see, is that it? That is it. Snorta Poopus is already weighing in as a former Virginian. I can say the area is so beautiful. It's hard for many people to imagine the amount of death that occurred there, not just in the Battle of Chancellorsville, but also in Fredericksburg and in the wilderness later. That is correct. And we are going to be going into that. Yes, about what happened before. So,
Absolutely.
Dadman, help us out here. What was going on at this point in the Civil War? We're talking about 1863. We've had the battles in the West, but in the East, the last big one was really the Battle of Fredericksburg.
Yes, which was around Christmas in December 1862. Actually, we have really to understand Chancellorsville, you've got to, I think, really look back at Fredericksburg and what had happened there, because we're talking about the same type of terrain. And I am going to bring up the first map that we have, just because I want to illustrate what we're talking about here. With that, because let me maximize. I should have maximized my screen.
No worries.
With that, so I'm not used to using Google Zoom, but it's of course there's our little display of all the disclaimers and stuff for everybody that's here. Let me do something real quick. Because
we believe in citing our sources here at Miss Martin.
Exactly.
No, we did not come up with this amazing map that we wish we could. But there's nothing wrong with using them, but as good historians, you always cite your source.
Yes, exactly. Let me do something real quick. Let me bring it back down. I do want to get the size that here. Let me I'm going to do something. I'm going real quick, if you don't mind. Sorry that I fouled that up.
Well, hello, everyone coming in, and those that will be watching on the replay. If you could like, share, and subscribe early and often, that would be great. And if you know anything about the Battle of Chancellorsville or have any experiences with it, did you see maybe the movie Gods and Generals, which I thought did a pretty good job with it, definitely with the untimely death of Stonewall Jackson. Well, look who it is Bucky's Crafting. Hello, everyone. Howdy, everyone, rather. Another YouTuber I'm subscribed to is doing a kitten stream, but I'm choosing to be here, and you should be honored. Oh, well, thank you. Yay. Instead of kittens, let's talk about Chancellorsville. Well, I've got a kitten, well, a very old kitty, is sitting in my lap right now, so it's kind of a kitten stream here, but she's going to be 20, so she's an old
Oh man, that's precious. So, all right. So let's go with this. Let me see. I want to be able to get this at a large enough angle here. Oh, wow. So there's disclaimers there, so folks. But if you can see up in this area with Fredericksburg is around in this area here, we're talking about the same terrain in here, because what we had was the Union forces attacked Fredericksburg in 1862, December 1862, right around Christmas. But in that battle, there were 120,000 Union, but there were still 75,000 Confederates. Lee had his whole army together, and they were all defending around the Fredericksburg area, around Marie's Heights. And so what you had with that battle was a situation where Ambrose Burnside had just been appointed commander of the Army of the Potomac. Of course, the change in leadership had been quite often through the Army of the Potomac. Irvin McDowell, then you got George McClellan, Then then you got Burnside, and actually John Pope was actually the Army of Virginia, which is technically not the Army of the Potomac. So you had all these different command changes in leadership, which also affected the unit effectiveness. And what happened though with this battle in 1860 at Fredericksburg, the first Battle of Fredericksburg, was that the Union suffered such a massive defeat there that the casualties were like 2-1 in terms of the loss. The Confederate loss, the Union lost to the Confederates. So let me see. I'm going to try another map here that I wanted to do right here. I was not pleased with the size of those, but here, let's try this one here. There we go. As you can see, in December 1862, what you've got the Union. You had Union on the north side of the Rappahannock, the Confederates on the southern side of the Rappahannock. But up in this area, right in the middle, you can see right in here, was a place called Marye's Heights. It commanded the town, commanded the ground. Had a natural defensive line with the stone wall. Have you heard about that one, Teresa?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I mean, it's really horrific. And people talk about Pickett's Charge, but I'll tell you what was going on in Marye's Heights. Oh, my gosh.
Because it was such, like I said, the casualties were 2-1, and the death on that field was it was charge after charge after charge. And part of what had happened was the logistics of the Union had failed it, because Burnside had to wait for weeks to get enough pontoon bridges to cross. When they finally did, Lee had been able to reinforce, get behind the walls, deploy his forces, and it was like just walking up to a turkey shoot, really. And you have many accounts, like the Irish brigades. One of the saddest things was about the Irish brigades. You had the Union Irish Brigade going up, getting just slaughtered, but you had the Confederate Irish Brigade cheering them on and saluting them from the heights.
Even as they were shooting at them.
Yeah, because they respected the bravery and what had happened. You have the reports that they were still shooting at bodies during the night. You didn't move and things like that. That's where I think Gods and Generals did a good job with Josh Lawrence Chamberlain in the Battle of Marye's Heights, because you could see that. You could see that action and what they had to do that night. Now, like you said, we'll fast forward, 5 months later. Well, Burnside actually, we'll see the route that Hooker planned to take for the Battle of Chancellorsville. Give Burnside a little bit of credit. He tried a similar route. He was going to go with a similar plan, but January, when he started to move, the rain season hit, the rivers flooded again and bogged everything down, and then eventually leading to his resignation as the leader of the Army of the Potomac. Insert Joseph Hooker now. So Joseph Hooker was able to take and rebuild the army, build the morale, bring them back together, get the spirits up. You want your army as prepped for it as to advance. So, and that's what he was brought into. So you've got that situation. So we're going to go back to this screen now we've got here. So folks, if you like maps, we got maps. So,
yeah, we got maps. Now, can we have a moment for,
yes.
Is it really true about Hooker?
Which
okay, I think it is. I've always heard it. Well, from him we get Hooker.
I don't know. I've never actually.
So everybody Google, because that's what I was always told. And Burnside, he had all those awful sideburns.
Oh, I know about Burnside and the sideburns. I never heard that about Hooker.
Yeah.
All I know is that YouTube once hit somebody's comment on mine when we were talking about Hooker. I got hit in Hooker, which was University of Tennessee quarterback. Mrs. had to approve it to go through. So, well, apparently it works. That's what you heard.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Because he liked to have him, and they were all like, "There's hookers."
Being a kid, loving the Civil War, studying the Civil War, I was completely naive to a lot of adulthood, and I was blissfully ignorant back then. But knowing what I know now, especially with the lady spies, anything is possible. anything is possible.
Well, they had camp followers and
Yes.
laundry ladies.
Yeah, you did that. They had the sutlers, the ironsmiths. They had, I mean, and actually some officers had their families come with them or visit them. There's the accountant Shiloh, W.H.L. Wallace. You know, he was mortally wounded on the field. His wife was coming to visit. She was there when he died. You know, other officers have had their families with them too. So. But it also there. So remember the Ken Burns Civil War series. There was one account from, I think it was Mary Chestnut, the famous diarist up in Virginia, that talked about how women would walk with us. You know, and unfortunately they find an extra set of legs under the skirts, the big dresses, because they're having to check the dresses for spies.
Yes, and spies, and they would smuggle. But yes, it says here, it's there were so many prostitutes working around Union General Joseph Hooker's army that they became known as Hooker's Division or Hooker's Brigade, or simply Hookers.
There you go.
Yeah.
Oh.
Now some say this is a myth.
But well, there are plenty of good myths.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Well, that's what makes fun with history. So,
yeah, it's true. Yeah, it could be apocryphal, but he did enjoy his hookers, so makes a good story.
You know, Dan Sickles was the one that was got off with temporary insanity because he shot his wife's lover. So there's all kinds of stuff out there. So you know, and that's the thing, is so much of history we will never really know. We can speculate, we can see what the accounts have, but you know, some of these are mysteries that will never be answered. So that's so good.
They were very cold during that winter and during all of this. So just so you all know, now you never know what facts you're going to come up with on Miss Martin.
No, you never know. And we got a lot more ready for y'all. So I'll show our little disclaimer again about the website that these maps are coming from. You know, that we're not changing them, that actually these are some of the better maps I've seen here. Now, as I mentioned, that Burnside in January, before he resigned, was going to try a similar route here, according to Hooker's perfect plan, as he called it. He was actually going to leave a division near Fredericksburg, but he's going to march most of his force around the right to Lee's left flank. But what he did also was he was going to send his cavalry far around and down to the south to cut off the rail lines, the communication back to Richmond, which I think is one of the biggest things. As we look at the importance of cavalry, look at what we see. This is before Gettysburg. We know what happened at Gettysburg with Jeb Stuart not around with Lee to help him. Once again, here, you know, the plan was to dispatch the cavalry where they could not be of immediate use to them. But so basically, this is where Hooker's plan is to come, is basically make a pincer movement from across the river at Fredericksburg after they have moved around to the Rappahannock, past the Rapidan, and approach Lee's left flank. So what that's typical double envelopments. You got your pincer movements. So that's the plan that Hooker had come up to. And that's why we wanted to say that you have to look back, considering the previous major battle, which was the Battle of Fredericksburg. You really need to look at that and consider that these two armies have been in this area for quite a while with that. So, all right, I'm going to bring us up to the status of April 30th now. So let me do that.
Closer to the battle. And I believe that Stonewall Jackson visited with his wife right before this battle.
Yes, they did.
She was over in Richmond, and he was able to stop in and say howdy. He just had a new baby.
Yes, a little one. And he was only 27 years old.
That's amazing to me.
I mean, the ages of these generals were just something, you know. We think of generals like in our 20th century, they're 60, 50, 60, 70-year-old geezers and stuff like that. But these were young people for the most part. Not always, but, you know, for the most part, they were really, really young. um, and how they got to these levels, these ranks. So, again, here's the status of this. We'll go back to this map again, as we see here, the situation as of April 30th. Okay, Sedgwick is still over near Fredericksburg, but we can see the troop movements where Hooker has taken about 54,000 of his men, have moved over to the west and digging in around Chancellorsville.
Oh,
which
sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no problem. No problem. It's all good. It's all good. So, well, when Lee understands what's happening here, he knows that the movement has happened. Well, on May 1st is when we actually have the Lee does what is not normally done in military warfare, and actually is going to be one of the top 7 factors that we talk about if we have time with the article. He divides his force in the face of a numerically superior enemy. Here at the Battle of Chancellorsville, there were roughly 130,000 Union troops compared to about 65,000 or 60,000 Confederate troops. At the previous battle, 75,000 Confederate troops. Now, but those 75,000 were all along Fredericksburg. Well, guess what? On May 1st, seeing the threat to the flank, Lee takes about 45,000 of those troops, leaves about 10,000 back in Fredericksburg, moves those 45,000 troops west towards where Hooker has crossed the river to stop the Union advance on May 1st. They meet near Zoen Church, and let me go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and take this down, and we're going to move to the next map we've got, which illustrates that movement we've got that day.
Yeah, and we cannot underestimate how reckless, if you will, what Lee did. I mean, it should have been a bloodbath. Him dividing up his army like that with that many Union soldiers, they could have all gotten slaughtered.
Yeah, and again, we've got our credit to our source here with this. But yeah, and see that is one of the military principles: is you don't divide your force in the face of a superior enemy. And think, he's already outnumbered 2-1. Already outnumbered 2-1 in this pace, and now he divides his force. He takes roughly 45,000, leaves about 10 or 15,000 back, and so he's 45,000. His odds are pretty good in terms of matchups. He's still outnumbered here on the western flank, but McLaws force troops under Jackson, Rhodes and Anderson division, and McLaws division move, and they engage. They with a lot of hard fighting in this area. They push the Union back a little bit, but what we find out is the first day right here on May 1st, every plan is good until the first shot's fired. We have the engagement here. The Union advance is stopped, and General Hooker, with his perfect plan, gets cold feet. He recalls all forces under Meade and Slocum back to Chancellorsville to unify and to dig in defensive positions.
Well, I would freak out too. Like, it's just amazing though when I look at this map, all these names, all these famous names, and many of them are going to be dead soon. Look at Reynolds over there in Fredericksburg, south of Fredericksburg.
Right. Taken out by a sniper at Gettysburg, right in the early part of day 1 too, actually.
And he's facing up there against Early, and you have, Meade. Well, he will become in charge. You got Jackson, A.P. Hill. Many of the Union people were wounded. Even Meade was wounded during this.
Yeah, and who will go on after this battle to become the permanent general in charge of the Army of the Potomac. Because U.S. Grant was not made the commander of the Army of the Potomac. He was made general of the overall U.S. armies, but he attached himself to the Army of the Potomac, which made sense because once they captured Vicksburg, you really had to. It was down to the Eastern Theater. But as we see here, this approaches, and this is the rough positions at the end of day one here. The Confederates have moved west. They've stopped the Union advance. They've got Hooker second guessing, pulling back in defensive positions. And what the famous event on May 1 is and there's a site at the battlefield that's marked, the Jackson Lee bivouac. They met as a council of war. The rumor has it they just had a couple of Union food crates, turned it over. They were sitting there talking as they were doing a strategy. They knew they were outnumbered. They knew they had facing threats on both sides, and so they had their bivouac at about midnight. A little after midnight, Jeb Stuart, who was not riding off in everywhere else this time.
Not joyriding this time.
No,
he was where he was supposed to be.
Yes, and Jeb Stuart had run a reconnaissance out on the Union left right flank and said, "Hey, the Union right is in the air," which means there was no man-made or natural obstacles to protect the Union right flank, that it was vulnerable to attack. That's when it was decided that they would take 30,000 of the 45,000 men. 15,000 were left here to do feints on May 2 against the Union front, but 30,000 men would then make the march around the right flank into the Union to hopefully surprise them. So that's
this
day
is
one.
An amazing feat that they're about ready to accomplish because Jackson's going to take his men up there to go around that flank, and it was pretty incredible, frankly.
I think they said it was like a 10-mile, but it was like, when you look at the amount of times, it was Jackson had issued general orders for their march should be 2 miles every 50 minutes with a 10-minute orderly break, which meant they stack their arms properly. They keep form, and then they advance. But think of this again, and again, we got our disclaimers to our source with its wonderful maps. But this is where they go. And actually, as Jackson marches out, they actually pass where the bivouac was. Now remember also, Jackson's carrying 30,000 men, but it's not 30,000 men in one spot. You got to train. You got a lot of people walking. They're marching, and you've got to understand that this line could stretch 6 miles back or 7 miles. I can't remember what the estimate of the length of the line was with 30,000 men marching 2 miles an hour. Now, as you see with this map, they come through and they're using the terrain to its advantage to skirt their movements. The trees, if you, Snortopupus knows this really well. This area is attached with the wilderness, and this place is very thicky with trees. And you think the Hornet's Nest had a lot of trees. This place is nothing but trees and everywhere. And we'll have accounts too that later in this battle in the wilderness that the trees catch on fire and the wounded have nowhere to go. Mm-hmm. That's how thick this place is with trees. But people think that maybe a Hooker wasn't paying attention. It was complete surprise. Well, they did have warning what was coming. As you can see right down here in this spot near Catherine Furnace, which is actually a furnace in the ground. There's still something there. Dan Sickles, who everybody did some interesting movements at Gettysburg, leaving them open at one point, comes forward, advances, and he does attack. It was such an annoyance that Jackson had to leave a unit behind to fight the rear guard, which was a Georgia unit that was eventually captured pretty much, and the commander was kicked out of the army for poor performance. So you can see there were other spots where they were seen. The Union had evidence that there were movements. Even Hooker, in response to this, sent word to Oliver O. Howard to beef up the right flank, watch for potential enemy movement over there. They did not put nearly enough out there. The pickets were too close, and they only had like 2 regiments or 2 brigades out there. Really, when the attack happens, it's like 2 brigades to stop, the onslaught of roughly 30,000 men. Um, but the point being is that it was not. There were indications that they should have been aware of something was in the works. But Hooker took of course, we talk about time when they start. Oh, hi, Lorena.
Yeah, hello.
And remember, like you said, they started at 7 o'clock in the morning. The attack does not start till 5 p.m. in the evening. So all that time. So Hooker, of course, nothing's happened. You start to let your guard down. And actually, when the reports came, if you look at this movement down south, like they're headed away into the southwest, they took it as retreating, that Jackson was retreating. Mm-hmm. So, of course, you wonder why you don't advance, but, that's a different thing. But as we see, they took this road for further deception, but of course, the bad side is it takes longer. It eats more of the daylight up, which we will see at the end of day 2 was very costly for Confederates. So as they march up here, Jackson meets up with Fitzhugh Lee around the Orange Plank Road. The original plan was to take the Orange Plank Road right into the Union right, but they found that the Union right extended out would have been a direct frontal assault. So they said that's no good. When they went further up north, up to the Orange Turnpike, and made the right turn, and that's where 30,000 Confederates come out of the woods with the famous rebel yell, according to all the accounts, overpowering a couple brigades, regiments here of the Union 11th Corps. The 11th Corps, which was, not really the most respected, didn't have the best weapons. They were an immigrant brigade. They were looked down on by the regular U.S. Army and other Union forces. And, of course, Oliver O. Howard has always had his weaknesses in spots like at Gettysburg and some other places too. But the 11th did show that it could fight in other battles that are here. As we see here on day 2, the Confederate onslaught comes in, drives the Union back towards Chancellorsville in good order. But then again, we have daylight run out. And at about 9 o'clock in the evening, Jackson knew that they did not do enough. Jackson knew that they had to continue pushing. But May at 9 o'clock, look outside your door. It's pretty dark here. I'm sure it gets darker up north earlier. So it's, or is it lighter? I get so messed up when I go up north, but
it's darker, and it was dark. Otherwise, what comes next wouldn't have occurred.
Yes. Because this was about 9 o'clock. He was out riding between the lines, between the North Carolina units, and there were some, I think, Maryland, there were some other Union elements. And we're talking within hundreds of yards of each other. This was dangerous territory. But, this is the type of commander Jackson was, and if we have time, we'll talk about some of the idiosyncrasies he has. So,
but it was foolish. It was dangerous, and I know that they were saying, "Come on, man, we need to go back. We're too far forward." Yeah, they could almost reach out and touch the Union at this.
But he drove it. He drove it to see, because he didn't trust the cavalry or anybody else to do the recon. He did it himself. See, I submit that I think that some of that has to do with his religious beliefs, and if we have more time to hit on that before we end that, because I think that says a lot into his decisions, what he is, because he was very strict Calvinist, which believes that God ordains time, and he really was secure, like he was being protected, and if it was his time, it was his time. So and he just, but also, how many times do you trust other people to an important decision, like at work? Of course, your life's not in line, but still, this is what he did. When you're
a general, Well, he's notorious for having said that he feels as safe on a battlefield as he does when he's in his bed asleep at night.
Yeah.
It's just no big deal. If it says, if the Lord comes to take me, he comes to take me.
Right.
And apparently the Lord decided, okay, your number's up.
Yep. And we'll see. And we'll see. Hopefully we can explore that a little bit, because it really wasn't the wound that killed him, as we'll find out. But that gets us to the end of day 2 on March 2nd here. The Confederates have advanced. They've knocked the Union back a little bit, but we still have our stalemate over by Fredericksburg. So, all right. That's day 1. Day 2. You got any? I'm going to switch slides if you want to.
Oh, sure.
Fill in.
Oh, okay. Well, are you going to talk about the moment, what happened, how it went about with Stonewall Jackson?
Yeah, we can do that. I was going to wait a little bit, but we can
Oh,
do
okay.
that.
Well,
Yeah.
because before we go on to the next day, I didn't know if you were
Mm-hmm.
going to go on to the next day, but of course, he will get shot by friendly fire
Mm-hmm.
because they're so close to the Union. I don't blame those poor Confederate soldiers who they saw these men and they were coming toward them, and that was also
Mm-hmm.
kind of foolish. So yeah, they fired on Jackson. He was shot 3 times,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
one of them, two, they said, what, two for superficial, one was really bad, which necessitated his
Mm-hmm.
arm to be amputated eventually.
Right.
But of course, what will kill him will be pneumonia coming from that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you should never
Right.
live before antibiotics.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, like we said before, it was around 9 p.m. to 9:15. He was pushing to continue the attack. It was actually North Carolina troops that had actually fired on him, and actually it was not musket fire. It was actually even artillery firing in the dark. Well, the first rounds that got him, and it was weird, is AP Hill was out with his staff too, that were actually closer to the line. This was, if you, it's like, how the heck did he get hit at that distance in the dark, and especially to get three times in his group? He was the only one really severely injured like that. AP Hill's group had more casualties in it. They were closer to it. But then, he was hit. His horse actually darted off from his officers. The officers had to chase the horse down, dismounting from it, and they knew it was serious. They applied tourniquets that they had, and when Dr. McGuire was there, they said didn't even re-tourniquet it, because they're like, the officers had done what they could, the best that they could, until they could do the surgery. But yeah, like you said, it was just so close to both lines, and you wonder about the Union forces, like, what's the heck going on out there? Like, what are they shooting at? We're not there.
Mm-hmm.
But what I found was interesting was the artillery usage too. Just because what had happened, one of the other things is the stretchers he's taken out, he's being bared out, but the Confederates still were shooting in during this all this time. And before you judge them, because AP Hill was crying out, "You're firing on friendly forces," and they heard back, "They're lying. Keep firing."
Mm-hmm.
Because they had actually had other cases during the war where the Confederates had been tricked at night.
Yeah.
So you're on picket duty, you're out there, you're not going to let them come through. So, and so you got that, the litter bearers, I think it's the litter bearers, but I call them the stretchers, but they actually dropped Jackson twice before they could get him on an ambulance.
Yeah. One
And
wasn't the dude's fault. He got shot.
yeah, I think the artillery, from what I heard, was what got him.
Okay.
So it's like, and then the second one happened, and what they suspect was, so they get him back. They amputate his arm, in the field hospital, and actually, Dr. McGuire did not want to just throw his arm, because look, watch Gettysburg, watch the movie Gettysburg. One of the realistic scenes that they've got is just body parts like stacked up, and they did not want to just take Jackson's arm and throw it in the body with everything else. Part of it had to do with the religious belief. That's why we have the talk that his arm is buried in a different location, because it was saved for proper burial.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then he goes back. They take him off to another house down the road. Actually, the house actually had some Confederate soldiers that were recovering, but they had an infectious skin disease. So that's why he was put in an outer house on the estate, to keep him away from those soldiers. But he made it looked like he was going to recover.
Yeah.
He got better, then it got worse, then he got better at times. But finally it started taking the turn, and Dr. McGuire, they attributed it to pneumonia at the time, that due to an injury caused in one of the falls when he hit the ground. Because remember, he's weakened, he hits the ground hard, so obviously something in the lung must have punctured or gotten injured, something that led to the pneumonia. But I have read. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, making a note that it took actually 4 hours also for him to get there because they had to run with a stretcher, then find an ambulance, and then get to help. And he was in shock. And as you said, had these injuries from being shot 3 times and then falling twice, shock. It's a miracle, frankly, he lived as long as he did, in my humble opinion, considering medicine back then.
Dr. McGuire's report said, let's see. He first extracted a round ball lodged under the skin at the back of the right hand after entering through the palm, fracturing 2 bones. Oh, by the way, that's one of the idiosyncrasies. He rode around in battle with one hand up in the air. They said to keep his equilibrium balanced. And that's one of the shots that hit his hand that was way up high there because of the way he rode at night. So Dr. McGuire said the left arm was then amputated about 2 inches below the shoulder very rapidly with slight loss of blood. The ordinary circular operation hadn't been made. And there were 2 wounds in the arm. The first and most serious about 3 inches below the shoulder joint, the ball dividing the main artery and fracturing the bone. The section was several inches in length. A ball having entered outside the forearm and an inch below the elbow came out upon the opposite side just about the wrist. Let's say what we talk about fracturing the bone. I think the Shelby Foote touched on the Civil War stories about how comparing to the modern full metal jacket rounds, those bulls, there was no bone left. There was no way you could save it. So your only course was amputation.
Yeah. Now, Snortopoopas says he thinks that Jackson was wearing a dark-colored raincoat that looked like a Union uniform when he was wounded. That's possible, or things also just look dark, too, because it was nighttime. And he gives us the source there. Yeah, very unfortunate.
Yeah.
And Robert E. Lee did say he left his left arm, and I have lost my right.
Exactly. That's a quote I had. Exactly. No, exactly. That's one of the most famous quotes there. And actually, Lee is said to have written Jackson basically saying, essentially that I wish that it had been me, not you, because that was such a blow that he knew had happened. And I misspoke earlier. Dr. McGuire, Jackson's personal surgeon, was 27 at this time. Jackson died at the age of 39. But still,
yes, I was double checking that too, and I was thinking, well, did he say? And then I couldn't remember if he had said Jackson.
I did.
Yes.
Yeah, I did. So that's why we always double checking facts and stuff like that, because I've got plenty of notes here. Because like we said, it was Stonewall Jackson, since we're talking about it, I mentioned a very devout Calvinist. If you know your religious studies and all, and not to get into a religious debate, but you really have to understand, in this case, the religion of the individual to understand the individual themselves. He was viewed as very weird, strange, had peculiar. He was very dedicated to Sunday. He did have slaves. He did have but he had them educated with the Bible. They would have worship services in the camps on Sunday. Like when he was, the day he died, he'd asked who preached that day. Yeah. And he was told, everybody's praying for you. And so there, but his death, he was also known to suck lemons riding into battle. He, of course, like I said, he said about the one hand in the air, and he was also viewed as a hypochondriac. And a lot of the students at VMI had, talked behind his back or found him very, very odd. That's for sure.
Yeah, but if you think about it, even at 39. That's not an old man either.
No.
for the economist. And he had been married twice. His first wife had died in childbirth, and then his second wife was the one that he was married to at this time, and she was able to come and be with him for when he did die. So it took him about several days, 6 days, was it, before he died? So he died after the battle was done.
And that's why that's why I have a problem when they say mortally wounded. He was recovering from the amputation and stuff. But it was this other unforeseen thing, and that came up, whether it's pneumonia or pulmonary. There's an article that I got. I'm going to put the link in the private chat for you, Teresa, since I'm going to talk directly from this. But I think it's very important. One to cite, but also this is the crux of what his death was very symbolic and very. There's a lot with this. So
Sure.
I'm going to read from this article on historynet.com. Because he was approached by one of his officers, Pendleton. They said when he actually, let me back up because this was recounted in the Ken Burns series too.
Mm-hmm.
Shelby Foote, if you watch it, really had a good voice and emotional with it. So, because it talked about this article says when his child was brought to him the next day, he played with it for some time, frequently caressing it, calling it his little comforter. Dr. McGuire observed. At one time, he raised his wounded hand above his head and closing his eyes. For some moments, silently engaged in prayer. He said to me, quote, I see from the number of physicians that you think my condition dangerous, but I thank God, if it is his will, that I'm ready to go. Mm-hmm. So, continuing to read from the article, at about daybreak on Sunday, May 10, Mrs. Jackson told her husband that his recovery was very doubtful, that he should prepare for the worst. Jackson was silent for a moment, then said, quote, it will be infinite gain to be translated to heaven. He advised his wife to return to her father's home, adding, quote, you have a kind and good father, but there's no one so kind and good as your heavenly Father, end quote. And he requested to be buried at Lexington, Virginia. He became increasingly exhausted, though his wife knelt and told him that sometimes I get emotional reading these type of things. Just, we're talking about people and stuff.
Yeah.
Before the sun went down, that he would be with his Savior. Jackson replied, quote, oh, no, you are not frightened. Oh, no, you are frightened, my child. Death is not so near. I may yet get well, end quote. So she collapsed, weeping on the bed, telling him the doctor said there was no hope. After a moment's pause, he asked to see McGuire. He's quoted, quote, Doctor, Anna informs me that you have told her that I am to die today. Is it so? He asked. McGuire admitted the hopelessness of the situation. Jackson turned his eyes towards the ceiling, gazed for a moment or two in deep thought, and then replied, quote, very good, it is all right, end quote. So then when Pendleton came in about 1 o'clock, Jackson asked who had preached at the headquarters, and Pendleton told him the entire army was praying for his recovery. Jackson replied, thank God, they are very kind. He added, it is the Lord's day. My wish is fulfilled. I have always desired to die on Sunday. As he continues to go in and out of consciousness, the doctor observed he frequently gave orders as though he was still in the battlefield. And then McGuire quotes, then the scene shifted and he was at the mess table in conversation with members of his staff, now with his wife and child, now at prayers with the military family. So McGuire offered him some brandy and water, but Jackson declined, saying, quote, it will only delay my departure and do no good. I want to preserve my mind, if possible, to the last, end quote. Told that he had at most 2 hours to live, he answered feebly but firmly, very good, it is all right. So a few moments before he died, Jackson cried out in delirium, order AP Hill to prepare for action. Pass the infantry to the front rapidly. Tell Major Hawks. The sentence was left unfinished. McGuire noted, quote, presently a smile of ineffable sweetness spread itself over his pale face. McGuire noted, and then, quote, and he cried quietly and with an expression as if of relief, quote, Stonewall Jackson here, quote, let us cross over the river and rest under the shade of the trees. And then, without pain or the least struggle, his spirit passed from earth to the God who gave it. End quote from Dr. McGuire.
Yeah, that's pretty moving, and it's I guess a good way to go as any. And I'm seeing that it notes here that that it was likely a pulmonary embolism, which makes complete sense as well.
Exactly. Which, at the time they did not have the medical technology, to know that. I mean, I don't know when we identified what embolisms were or not, but based on whether it's pneumonia or not, or
it was a death sentence. Yeah, they couldn't do anything about it. Snortopupus makes a good point, which I kind of believe too in many ways, that things were meant to be the way they worked out in the Civil War. And he says, I've always felt that God took Jackson because the war had finally become about the ending of slavery. That is mystical as this bear gets. Yeah.
It's interesting, though. That was one of the biggest things in the U.S. Civil War, too, is that the whole and I can't remember who quoted it, but I know I heard it in the Civil War series, that it's both sides were claiming to do the will of God, and the providence was for both. I mean, how can God be for and against the same thing at the same time?
I think
One
that was
side had to be
Abraham
right.
Lincoln that said that.
Maybe okay, because I know the quote. It just stuck with me forever.
Yeah, it's a hard one. It's
Mm-hmm.
a hard one, but both felt like they were following their consciences, and the war did shift throughout, and even in the North, it was very clear we're not doing this to end slavery. And then, for several reasons, Abraham Lincoln said, or maybe we will." Yeah, so things changed after Antietam, I believe, was when.
I think so too, and I think still there was even resentment in the North.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody bought in on the free the slaves cause either, even in the North. I mean, there were a lot. There were some units that quit. They let their papers run out or defect.
The draft riots.
Yeah,
draft
riots. Yeah.
A lot of it was rooted in racism, and
Mm-hmm.
or a lot of it was in, this is not what we signed up for. We signed to save the Union.
Right, and I think that's a point that we have to acknowledge too, because I think sometimes it's very easy now in the 21st century and it had been in the 20th century to look back and just blame one side as being all the the bad people, and it's like but both sides had their share of racism in it in many ways.
Yeah. Well, the movie Glory showed that really well, frankly, in what the 54th Massachusetts endured.
Yeah.
But it's not a time that any of us would have wanted to have lived in, but they, as you said, they were human beings and they were having this drama. So to go back to the battle, in the midst of all of this, we have this horrible wounding at this moment of Stonewall Jackson. He's having surgery, but they still have a battle to fight.
Yeah, they do.
Still have the Union out there.
Jeb Stuart takes command. The cavalry commander takes over Jackson's infantry unit. We see at Gettysburg, it's George Ewell. Ewell. That's it. Oh Ewell. My gosh! But let's not get on Ewell tonight. Well, that'll be another time. But yeah. So then let me bring up the next map we've got, because this is a two-parter map, because this is day 3 had March 3rd had 2 different actions really in it. We've got, there we go. Here we go with that. So day 3, okay, we see over on the western side, the Confederates had pushed the Union back into the Chancellorsville itself. This is when we had the wonderful case. Confederates are still making advances on it. Sickles is holding out. Hooker's there at his headquarters, and then a artillery round hits the pillar Hooker was leaning against, and it knocked him out for about half an hour. So,
giving him a concussion, and that will play a bit of a role as well.
Exactly, and what a lot of the Union commanders actually were mad that they wanted him to be knocked out and stay incapacitated, because they wanted to really replace him. Because remember, he pulled back on May 1st from the advance, brought everybody back. The whole attack was supposed to be aggressive, use our advantage, and it'd be a perfect plan. He pulled back. Then now they still have a 2-to-1 odds with this. You're going to be when we go through the numbers of the forces, it'll be very eye-opening, and understand why the Union officers really were upset with Hooker at this point. But of course, once you lose the advantage, it's hard to get it back. Stuart, McLaws, Anderson continue the push on this side. That was probably the most significant event that happened on that side. Really, there's so much detail out there with these things, with these battles, and we're kind of also trying to not get too into all the detail, but the high points. But you can see that the Confederates have gotten the advantage. They're taking advantage of what they've got, putting the Union back on their heels. And then one of the things that happened, and as I learned, is that Lee wanted to continue the pursuit. Lee wanted to continue to crush that part of Hooker's army. But what we see is, and you wonder if this had happened a day earlier, had Sedgwick crossed a day earlier, what would have happened? because you had 15,000 Confederates right here, 10,000 here, 30,000. Most of the army had gone around the right. But Cedric breaks through, Marie's Heights, which was a bloodbath at first Fredericksburg, was not so this time. But then again, you didn't have 75,000 Confederates on this one part of the field. You had 10,000. So, and this indicates that where the second Battle of Fredericksburg, as it's known, as a Union victory, happened right over here at the same spot where it happened. But they, overwhelmed the Confederate forces, which they did not have that advantage in the first Fredericksburg. They continued to march down towards the Salem Church. So we ended up having the Battle of Salem Church, because instead of continuing the pursuit to push the advantage, because they had Hooker back to the water. They were going to have to cross the U.S. Ford, but Lee had to deploy McLaws back east to hook up with Early to stop Sedgwick at Salem Church. And that ends day 3 with that.
Wow. Okay. And then, sorry, yeah, like the hook, where the hooker was, and the sickle, and all sorts of different.
Yeah, what a shape! I didn't even notice that at first, but yeah. It continued to change shapes, because we'll see here on day 4 here. This is actually a day 4, 5, 6. This is pretty much the battle's over. What we have over here is the McLaws and Early, now reinforced by Richard Anderson, forced Sedgwick on May 4th back across the river. The Confederate attacks stalled the Union advance on this side, and the battle's pretty much over. That's the only engagement action on May 4th that's here. So with both sides stopped and stalled, eventually on May 5th, Sedgwick pulls back across the Rappahannock, Gibbon pulls back, and then on May 6th, Hooker finally retreats, because on May 5th, Hooker held his council of war with his commanders. And guess what the commanders recommended?
What?
The commanders recommended to continue the assault. But Mr. General Hooker, with his perfect plan, decided we are going to retreat, continuing the pattern of Union generals, of the commanders of the Army of the Potomac. Lose a battle and retreat. Lose a battle and retreat. And so that concludes. I think that's the last map I have. We can take it down, we can leave it. I'm going to show here one more time about our disclaimer and our licensing and the links to where you can find these great maps here. And this really, folks, this is what I loved about this map, and I'm going to gloat on it a little bit, Teresa, in case somebody watches, because I like that it doesn't give you so much detail. Because some of the detailed maps, you go down to like the regimental, the company, and there's so many dots on it, you can't make sense of what's what. The reason
you can't
why
get the big picture, and that it defeats the purpose.
Right. And this tonight was about the big picture, because you can see the plot, the plan, how they moved to the right. You can see how Jackson took his route. And that's what we wanted to show you, because this battle was very significant, because just also right there, we talked about how Lee split his force once already, right? When, well, he brought Jackson and all the others to the west, right? Then he split it again by having Jackson do the flanking maneuver. Well, on day 3, he did, day 3, he split it a third time by sending McLaws back east. So 3 times chasing, dividing his force in the face of a superior enemy. Well, we're going to talk about that in just another moment. But those are the maps. And folks, these are great maps, because like you said, Teresa, it's seeing the big picture, because this is one of those battles you really need to see the big picture. It's not one like localized area. It's like Manassas to me. You need to see the bigger picture to see how, how the movements, because the movements were important in these areas, and in the terrain. This one also has geographical features on it. It's just not a static flat map. You can see the forest, you can see the hills, you can see all the ridges, and all that.
Rappahannock too, and and you mentioned this earlier, but the wilderness, which we see there, just like the later Battle of the Wilderness, many of the wounded died very awful deaths because they were stuck, they couldn't move, and
Right.
the fire wasn't going away.
No, it wasn't. And I know Snortopoopas can, like I said earlier, he can testify. This is thick tree area. There's brush. They don't call it the wilderness for no reason. There's a reason why they call it that. And all that spark just takes one spark, especially if it's been dry, and it can set things on fire very quickly and burn really quickly. But with that, folks, that's the Battle of Chancellorsville. But we can talk about some other details out of it, Teresa,
for sure,
because there's still some more information that's with it.
Yeah. Well, before you go on, I just want to point out that you said that Hooker followed the pattern that all of the other Union soldiers, rather generals, were doing, at least the ones on the East Coast. Finally, Abraham Lincoln would find the man who wouldn't do that, and that was General Grant. And that is quite possibly why he was successful, that not only would he keep going when the Union won, he would keep going when the Union lost.
And we will see that, because up until this point, this is May 1863. Again, every commander retreats. When they lose, they retreat. McDowell did, McClellan did, Pope did. They all did. And I tell you, the problem, U.S. Grant has got a big fan. Snortopoopas Cooper, I know, and that's one of his favorite generals. But the thing is, everybody seemed like in the war trying to do everything you do to subvert Grant. I mean, Halleck did, they tried to use his drunkenness against him, this, that, all the struggles that he had. And but it's summed up in what Lincoln said when people wanted to have him removed after battles in 1864, like Cold Harbor, Wilderness. Folks, there are more bloody battles in the same area to come in the next year and a half leading up to the re-election of Lincoln. But they kept accusing Grant of callousness. I mean, the numbers were horrific. Like take this battle here. Lincoln is quoted as this, saying, my God, what will the country think?" When I tell you the statistics and the numbers of the Union losses, that's the first reaction. But it is bad, because what Lincoln did say, though, about Grant, when people wanted him removing in the East after those battles, was, I cannot spare this man. He fights.
And
that's
also allegedly he said, when people complained about his drinking, he said, well, find out what he's drinking so I can spread it out to all the other generals.
That's a new one I hadn't heard, but that makes
could
a
be
lot of
apocryphal, but it sounds good, doesn't it?
It does sound good. It does sound good. But you know what? Looking at the stats from battlefields.org, I'm going to actually put this link also in the private chat for you too, if you want to. Okay. Because this is a good one here.
Is this the one about 7 ideas about?
No, that's a different article. Okay. I will get to that in a second. But this one is our numbers that are going to come from the statistics in this. So to credit them, this is personally one of my favorite sites. They have a YouTube channel, the American Battlefield Trust too. They do more than just Civil War also. But according to the numbers, there were, in terms of actual engaged combatants, they have it down at 154,000 total and change forces engaged, 97,000 Union, 57,000 Confederates. Folks, they said, remember what I said, 130,000 Union. There were 40 to 45,000 Union troops that did not even see combat in this engagement. That, you wonder why the officers under Hooker were mad.
Oh, they knew just lost it.
They knew, what's that?
I would have just lost it. I would have ended up in jail.
Yeah, they knew they had the advantage. They knew they had all this stuff, but Hooker, with his perfect plan, wouldn't do it. The other thing too is he sent his cavalry where they could be of no use to him. And we're going to see how that happened and affected the Battle of Gettysburg. And you've already talked about before a while back on your stream, because the cavalry was your intelligence gatherer. It's the eyes and ears of your army, as they said. And, they had reports of the Jackson moving. but only Sickles moved out on his own initiative to attack part of it. And actually was successful. But they did not have the cavalry around to respond to quick track. Or hey, run up on Jackson while he's in marching. Catch an infantry column on the move when they're vulnerable. So.
Yeah, I can see him wanting to give what Grant was drinking to the rest if it got them to fight. Yeah, it was a story.
Exactly.
I just looked it up. It's that it had been circulating since 1863. Now, whether he really said it, it doesn't matter. It was put in the newspapers. It says here that if he could find out what brand of whiskey Grant drank, he would give a barrel of all of it to the other soldiers.
Exactly.
I wasn't going crazy. I'd heard of that.
No. So and Hooker had 10,000 cavalry under George Stoneman, but the reorganizations, and we're going to see that as the article. I'm going to go ahead and put that link out there for you in the private chat if you want to put that there, because I think we're now at that point. But it's just too many tabs.
Thank you for being here, Tommy, and thank you for your kind words. Glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Absolutely. Thanks for coming by. Let's see if I can find. I got too many tabs open, and I'm finding the right tabs. So
understood. Yeah, and I did see what you said, Tommy, about the Angel of Mary's Heights. Maybe when I do Fredericksburg, I will go into detail with that.
Oh boy, that's you want a sad battle, especially the accounts of the Irish brigades.
Oh yeah, I mean that was horrendous.
And especially you had the Irish brigade, like I said earlier, the Southern Irish brigade. It's funny that everybody identified as Irish, whether North and South, and they stuck together. But you had truly it became brother against brother in that case. Yeah, and I tell you what, a lot you may have said about Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. They remembered they were shouting Fredericksburg back at the Confederates after Pickett's charge.
Yeah, because it was like poetry. It rhymed.
Yep.
Grant's favorite brand of whiskey, says Nordapupus, was Old Bear Bladder. It grew hair on your feet. And Corey Cochran said it does no good to have a bigger and better army if you don't use it.
Yes. Again, what Lee said. I mean, Lincoln said he fights. If you look at the West, and I'm grateful we got to tour the battlefields in the West, they were always moving. Yeah, it took a couple of years, but they were always progressing southerly. The hang up around Vicksburg caused them to have to be unique and do some different things to try to run down and find a river crossing, then approach it and surround it. Which I love Vicksburg. We visited Grand Gulf, which is down there on the Mississippi. Oh man, if you ever get a chance, the Mississippi flows way, way, way fast. Where we were, it was just amazing. Amazing how anybody can navigate that river. Sorry, just
yeah. Well, there's tons of battlefields, and I always encourage people go check out these battlefields. They're amazing. It's our history, and it's right here.
And it can show you stuff.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You can't see this stuff in the history books or pictures. It does not do the justice to it.
No. Okay, well, let's go through some of these 7 things. I'm looking at the first one. It says Robert E. Lee's perfect battle went against all military convention. Yeah, we already talked about that. Everything he did was what you weren't supposed to do.
They did it 3 times if you count up. Some say 2, but I'd say 3 because. You have your the one on the first day, then when he sends Jackson around the flank, but then of course on day 3 with sending McLaws back east, you're still dividing your forces, outnumbered.
Yep.
But yes,
even if you're Robert E. Lee, but he managed it. That's why it's called Lee's masterpiece. I said in the green room before we started the stream that if it ended up being a slaughter, it would be Lee's disaster, or Lee would be a villain over it. In many ways, the way Pickett's charge is looked at.
Yeah, exactly.
People don't want to make Lee a villain, but yeah, it would have been, how could he have done something so stupid? That's what they would have looked at it if Hooker's army had smashed them.
Well, it's like some football coaches these days. They get successful and everybody loves them when all their gambles pay off and they can go for fourth down every time and get it every time.
Mhm.
But then when the magic runs out and they're losing games because of it, then everybody turns on them.
Exactly.
So
And
I like
and it
what
says the
Short Hoops
recent
just said there too.
overhaul of the Union Army may have played a role in its defeat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, because Ambrose Burnside did these things about super divisions or some kind of other things, but now, so he also had some resignations that left him short on experienced field officers. So, and they centralized his cavalry unit, which was unusual for the time. Uh, so, who knows? We know the cavalry wasn't there. The plan was to move south to cut off communications, but it may have been sort of near there, but they were not involved like they should have been on the lookout for. Because usually your artillery, your cavalry would be out in the front. They're scoping out where you're going to, looking out. That's kind of like J.O. Beeford at Gettysburg. He was out there scouting around looking for the enemy, and lo and behold, they came up on them.
Yeah, Snortapoopa says, I always argue that Lee may have been the better tactician, but Grant was a superior strategist.
Very true. And see, this is this type of situation, and I've seen some speculate on it, is that when they bivouacked, they were kind of confronted with, well, we are completely outnumbered. What do we do? And it meant maybe more of a crapshoot well, we might as well do this because we're outnumbered. Not necessarily of, hey, let's got a bright idea. What else are they going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And they were really, really out of options with that. They also talked about I mentioned the 11th Corps under Oliver Howard.
Mm-hmm.
He was unpopular with his own men, and and one of the brigadiers was Francis Barlow, who was equally disastrous, and they said was unpopular and cruel. So the men of the 11th, which took the brunt of the 30,000 Confederates coming out, many were immigrants from the Midwest, with poor English, little training, and were completely unprepared to protect the Union's right flank. So, and they suffered significant casualties in the process of this. So, and of course you had communication error between language barriers and stuff, and it's but then again, I think if you look at it, a lot of it bears on Hooker too. He let his guard down he warned Howard out there, but he also didn't follow up on it. They kind of, him pulling back, him not using the superior numbers. So, it all adds up, so.
Sure.
Yep.
He says what we've already talked about, Lee won the battle, but at a high cost because of losing Jackson. If Jackson had been at Gettysburg, would things have gone the way they did?
That is the question we will never know. Who knows? Some submit that he would have taken the high ground that Ewell didn't that night. So, and that's always the biggest question. But look, but honestly, it's not just that. Lee, when we look at the casualty numbers with this, oh crap! I closed when I didn't mean to close. Okay, but Lee's, there were 13,000 Confederate casualties in this between killed, wounded, and missing. That was 22% of Lee's force, men that could not be replaced. So it's easy to focus on the loss of Jackson, but when you look at the numbers of men, the percentage that they lost, that speaks for itself. That is a huge cost that the Confederate Army had to pay. Already outnumbered, already outsupplied, and then you lose 13% of your fighting force in one battle. Yeah, that's another element out of this battle that comes through. And there are more battles to come too. That's the thing. The bloodbath does not end.
And in a way, that's what caused it all to end, because Lee just literally ran out of soldiers.
And officers. And don't forget the officers. And not necessarily generals. But your colonels, your captains, because because remember, you had to mass your men to mass your fire and stuff, and that's why you had unit integrity. You had to keep your formations and stuff. All that was going there. You were getting promotions on the days. Even this battle had accounts of green people actually having to move into some of those roles that really they were not prepared or trained for. It was just like, hey, you're next man up, go perform.
Yeah, says it's 30,764 casualties made Chancellorsville the bloodiest battle in American history. Briefly, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Only to be replaced by Gettysburg 2 months later. And see, Battle of Shiloh. We've talked about Battle of Shiloh. That's not even in the top 4 right here. I mean, and we know how many casualties they had at Shiloh. So, and in this case, nearly 2/3 of the battle's casualties occurred on the May 3rd, that one day. It produced more dead and wounded than the entire first battle of Bull Run. So, when the war ended, according to this article, Chancellorsville ranked as the 4th deadliest clash of the war, surpassed only by battles at Gettysburg, Chickamauga, which we have visited, Spotsylvania Courthouse, I visited in the 80s. So Lee won the battle, but the 13,000 casualties equaled 22% of its fighting force. And as the article said, a number nearly impossible for the Confederacy to replace. And of course, the Union lost 17,200 men. Now, remember, that 17,000, it's dead, wounded, and it's not all dead. But, and remember, Fredericksburg, about 5 months earlier in December, there were 12,000 Union casualties to about 6,000 Confederate casualties. So the massive losses, though, and of course, to every politician's nightmare is the casualty count, because guess what happens with the casualty count? What happens back home? People get tired of the war. They get mad. They get sad. It's not good for morale. I mean, everybody loves to go to war, but when the news starts coming home, it's not good. Can remember, because in the early days, this was a party. It was supposed to be a 90-day war. Everybody went out of Washington with picnic baskets and stuff to go watch a battle, and then something that was 90 days became a 4-year struggle with a lot of bloodshed.
Exactly.
Did you also about Jackson's body is buried in 2 places?
Yes. I did skip over that briefly, but yes, his arm, so you can go visit his body or visit his arm.
Yes, his body is in Lexington. I think, if I remember, that might be where VMI actually is. I'm thinking Lexington, Virginia. But his arm has actually got its own National Park Service website. Visiting site. We were going to go there last year, but our fall trip got canceled. That was going to be one of our stops there. But there's actually rumors about that. Was it moved or something by Union soldiers and stuff? But at least they said that that for nearly 4 years, the location remained unmarked until one of his former officers, who was a member of the family that owned the property, erected a stone monument. Reads Arm of Stonewall Jackson, May 3, 1863. I've seen other accounts with that, but it's one of those things. Is it apocryphal? Is it real? Well, we got a monument that says it, so. But
there's an arm in there. We know that. Wouldn't it be fun if they did DNA tested just to be sure?
That would be cool.
Let's do it. Let's do a petition. Let's get that going.
Yep.
And then what we all know is Hooker became the latest in a long line of short-lived Union commanders. Yeah, he was going to be replaced by Meade 3 days before Gettysburg.
Mm-hmm. Meade became the 3rd man to command the Army of the Potomac in 1863 alone.
Crazy.
Yeah. But he became the last, because like you said, that's one thing years ago I had to get straight. You always assume that, well, Grant now leads the Army of the Potomac. No, he didn't. He actually, because you see the pictures of him at City Point meeting with Lincoln and all this stuff. You think he's the commander of the Army of the Potomac, but he wasn't. He was the general of the Army. Mm-hmm. So, but he had attached himself, which would make sense. Why would you stay in the Western Theater at that point?
Correct.
At that point, after the fall of Vicksburg, the action was back east. There, and effectively, I submit there was really no, after Albert Sidney Johnston, there was no army in the West, effectively, for the Confederates.
Yeah, and it was just for Sherman to, Sherman, do what he did.
Mm-hmm. Well, you also get here's the thing. Well, let's talk about this for a second. One of the things, and I don't know, I know our friend resident, our historians out there love for the debate with this. See, I know that there was no love for Joseph E. Johnston in the South. He was not a favorite of Jefferson Davis. Well, Joseph E. Johnston and P.G.T. Beauregard led to Confederate victory at Manassas. Well, we talked about here how Lee, normally what his threat should have been, the normal strategy confronted with Hooker on his flank would have been what? To retreat.
Mm-hmm.
Your flanks threaten, you retreat to a more defensible position. Well, Johnston outside of Atlanta kept being faced with that, getting moved, outnumbered, but getting moved, and not just outgunned, but being so outnumbered. The flank, he kept getting outflanked. Well, he kept pulling back, he kept retreating, which caused the friction with the Confederate government of, we want you to fight. Well, see, and that's a case where somebody plays the playbook, but it doesn't make the leaders back home happy.
Yeah.
And because Lee got lucky here, did it overstate his abilities? I mean, he became almost godlike. I mean, he viewed his troops at that point that we can't be defeated.
Yeah.
That's been accepted with, we see some of the stubbornness at Gettysburg, so there's things. But I like with Johnston, I like to see if anybody has a thought with that, if they know it, because Johnston always, I felt, and I had a disagreement with a friend of mine, that I like Johnston. I thought he did the best he could with his men because he played the book. He did whatever. But, my friend's like, no, he didn't know what he's doing. Well, I contrast it to, if you know about John Bell Hood, one of the Longstreet's division commanders at Gettysburg, when he became commander of the Army of Tennessee, he flat out he destroyed his army at Franklin. And, it's one thing as being aggressive, but you had numerous talented generals killed at Franklin. But, the leadership they want. They got an attacking general. Is it always good? Like you said earlier with Lee here, hey, in this case, the crapshoot worked. What happens when it doesn't?
Precisely. Yep. Corey Cochran brings up a good point about George McClellan. He had been good at training the army, and he did. They reaped a lot of the fruits of it, but trash at using it.
He was known as the Virginia Creeper.
And not for reasons we would think of.
No.
Yeah. And Smyrna-Pupus has some good facts about the horses. The difference between being the number 1 horse versus the number 2, Traveler. Lee's horse is buried in a nice grass plot outside of Lee's chapel in Lexington, while Old Sorrel, Jackson's horse, was stuffed and put in a display case in the Marshall Museum in Lexington. Wow. Well, Bucky's Crafting says, I've got to go have a good rest of the stream, everyone. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Great to see you. And then I just want to go to the last fact here. It says the Red Badge of Courage is based on Chancellorsville. I
did not know that either.
I don't know. It says Stephen Crane was born nearly 6 years after the war's end. His novel is widely to be one of the most realistic portrayals of the Civil War. Wow. Crane was only 24 when the book came out, based on the battle scenes and troop movements on those set at Chancellorsville, and is believed to have interviewed veterans of the campaign. I should know this, but the literature is not the kind of stuff I know. I'm more into the other kind of social history of all of this.
Oh, I am too. I'm not much about that, but I mean, it's like understanding that Lew Wallace, the Union general, wrote Ben-Hur. We saw his name at Shiloh. But that I didn't know about with this book. So
yeah, well, in 1862, Victor Hugo's Les Miserables came out, and it was very popular in the South, and they called themselves Les Miserables. That is a true story.
Oh, cool.
I have confirmed that because Les Miserables is one of my favorite books. So
Always confirm. Always confirm.
yes. So,
That's exactly.
when I say it might be apocryphal, I will say so. But in this case, no, this is true.
Yeah, it's funny. Les Miserables is something that grew on me. I hated musicals and stuff, but I watched it one time and I got addicted to it. I drove the missus crazy because I was playing it all the time. So.
Mm-hmm. It's very good. The book is
Get
better,
some,
of course.
yeah.
But yeah.
Now they say to read the abridged book, though.
No.
No.
How dare you? How
No,
dare you?
that's
Read
what I've
all
heard.
1,400 pages. It's
Wow. Okay.
It's brilliant.
Okay.
But I digress.
That's okay.
That's
I love
another
the passion.
for
It's
another
like,
day.
oh, that's too funny.
Well,
Yes.
okay, the abridged will give you the plot, but the richness is so rich in it. But I'm gonna do a Les Miserables stream one day. I will, but not
Now,
today.
you do permit me. I do kind of joke with it. I call it less miserables, but I just do it out of silliness. But yeah, it's wonderful. I can only imagine how good the book is. See, it's historical. It's got that French Revolution connection and or that time period. I just love that time period. I had a humanities course around the 1850s to 1880s, and just a wonderful time of music, art, and just the world was always in chaos and changing.
Yeah. Well, the more I live my life, the more I'm on the side of Marius's grandfather, who is like, "You're all wrong. You're all wrong.
Yeah,
You're all," and I'm like, he's kind of right. But
yeah.
I will really digress now. But in any case, before we go to our outrows,
Can
oh
we
my
get?
gosh, I'm getting out my southern here, my
There you go.
outrow.
You hang around with me enough, I'll make you say y'all too.
Yeah. Oh, I'd say you all. Well, it says
Yeah.
here. Snort Poop says, unless it was something I said, you can 100% trust anything I say 50% of the time.
Yes. Well,
All
one
right.
thing I wanted to, can we hit one comment real quick?
Sure.
That Snort Poop set up before it about recalling Sherman was happy when Hood took over from Johnson. Yes,
Oh.
I'd heard about that because Hood, Sherman had the numbers, but he had the equipment and all. This was a very poorly. You thought the Army of Northern Virginia was down and ill-equipped. The Army of Tennessee was even in worse shape. It got less than the Army of Northern Virginia because it was away from them, and that was a big turn because after that Atlanta fell, and then that led to the March to the Sea, and eventually, the Army of Tennessee actually disintegrated really after Atlanta. Mm-hmm. Their units, you got down to about under 20,000 from wherever it was, and it ended up in the armies of the Carolinas mixed with the Department of Florida, South Carolina, and Georgia. That's how much the Army of Tennessee had fallen apart and actually became back under, guess who? Joseph E. Johnston again at the end of the war. Well, so, but yeah.
You heard it here first. So, no, I was going to say, do you have any closing thoughts or anything else you'd like to say about the Battle of Chancellorsville before we go to the outro?
There's just so much to learn from it. It's, people recognize its significance, but I think that there's a lot more to it than what we do. There's more than just that Lee lost Jackson. There's look at the numbers behind it. Look at the strategy. I mean, once again, Union commander does not use his full potential against a smaller army. And the results, because the results lead down the road, and we see the next one in Gettysburg. Losses that could not be replaced of officers, and then again Lee's attitude about his army, and then. He makes the same mistake with your cavalry is off doing something else, not helping your army as it's advancing in a foreign country, as they say. But I love this discussion, Teresa. Thank you so much for reaching out. I love talking U.S. history, specifically the Civil War.
Oh, yeah.
And it's an honor to be here.
To talk with you, especially since you really have the details of the military stuff down. And it's always fun to kind of sit and listen and learn too and go over it. One of these days, I'm going to do like maybe a bit of more of the social history, which is my aspect of it. My studies were the clothing, for example, and the cooking and the the domestic front, like what was going on
Mhm.
with the women during the Civil War.
I talked about hardtack one night on one of my chill streams. We talked about hardtack,
Oh yeah.
how it was created. Because, in the South, they really didn't have a lot of the flour and all. They had to take what they get was corn. And that's where you get the Johnny cakes, which is kind of a Southern replacement for it.
Yeah. In
So,
many ways, yes, it was very uncivil, though there were aspects of it where you just see brotherhood, though. We can say it till we're blue in the face. The way the surrender happened is the only way a civil war ended if there's a close to a happily ever after, or at least a happy ending, at least between the soldiers, that they saluted each other at the end.
mhm.
I don't think wars end like that
Yep.
usually. They end a lot more unhappily. It
Yep.
looks more like the Alamo, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Our tech and beams, no. Yes. But of course, the women left behind and all of
Well,
that.
and like you said, the period stuff. I mean, you can look at the architecture. You can look at all kinds of different things with that. I mean, it's just there's so much that can be looked at. You can look at the music of the time period. I love Civil War
Mm.
music. There's
Oh, the music's amazing.
Oh, I know. I mean, and unfortunately, some of the songs you can't hear anymore because of political reasons, and
Yeah.
it's kind of sad. I actually had a game. Actually, one of the songs I do on a karaoke stream, Mississippi Squirrel Revival.
Mm.
Ray Stevens, are you familiar with that song?
I am not familiar, no.
Oh man, okay. If I ever see it one of the karaoke streams I'm on, I've got to sing that one for you because it's a good old uh, a parody song about his church getting loose in a church, probably a Baptist church, and getting everybody start jumping the pews and confessing and all. It was really a cool song, but it actually had in the real release a little couple bars of Dixie. In the
Mm.
karaoke version, they don't play it,
Yeah. Well,
and
and some of the songs, let's be honest, were quite culturally insensitive, I will say. But one thing I think is hilarious about the music is often the North and the South, the different armies would make parodies of the other
yes,
people's and taunt them with it. Uh,
yes,
the one that I love is Just Before the Battle Mother. Have you ever heard the parody of that one?
no.
Oh, it was the Confederates would sing Just Before the Battle Mother, as I was drinking Mountain Dew, when I saw those rebels coming to the rear, I quickly flew.
Hmm. Oh yeah, okay. Oh, you
Making
see,
fun of them running.
and you also had the same tunes to different words. I think Battle Cry of Freedom had different words on North and South,
Mhm. Yep,
but it was the same music.
correct, yeah,
I
and some
won't
of those
sing.
tunes were good. I mean, they
They
were
are wonderful.
solid music.
One of my favorites is the Bonnie Blue Flag with the instrumental and stuff with it. It's got a beautiful tune and music to it. And,
Yeah, I love
yeah,
Tinting Tonight in the Old Campground. I think that's a great song, and so is Lorena. That was a very popular
yeah.
song, even though it's not necessarily about the war, but it was a very popular song.
Hmm.
But
Exactly. That's a wonderful avenue to explore sometime, especially with your musical or your, like you said, your social background. That
mhm.
sounds interesting.
Yeah, I don't think they're copyrighted, but you just never know the way that works. I think different performances are copyrighted. That might be
Right.
part of the issue with using them here. But I really do digress. Yes, no singing. There will
Yes.
be no singing. Maybe one of these days I'll
Well,
get
if
to
Teresa
do.
sings, if
Yeah, I was
Teresa
gonna
sings, I
say
think Sort of Poops would be okay. He's talking about me because
one of
I
these
try to sing
days
on my stream.
maybe I'll show up on Jedi Bill's karaoke. The main problem is it's
Yeah.
usually very late at night, and I'm not
Yeah. Well,
around.
sometimes he starts a little bit earlier.
Mhm. Oh,
If you do, you pop in, I'll get it to where I sing it immediately. Usually, he loves that song so much, I do it as my final song of the night. But if I see you, you say you're there, and I will do it.
okay, fair enough. Well, where can we find you?
Uh, Dadmanwalking55, right here, everywhere. Twitch, YouTube, Twitter. Also, I have to say, if it doesn't have a G, it's not me, because there's a dead fake out there on Twitter that has that in the avatar except for the G. So that's me right there. Dadmanwalking55 on Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter. Most of my stuff going forward for a while due to some life situation are probably going to be more random streams. I'll pop up on certain channels somewhere here and there, but my own programming is I need flexibility with life, and of course, I have fun, love talking to people. Teresa's great. Maybe have her with our one of our squirrel streams one night, and this type of thing. So that's where you find me at these days. And of course, the missus is this her channel too. And we thank you, Teresa, for the support for both of us that you've given.
Well, no problem at all. Well, thank you. And you can find me here in Miss Smart Muses, where I talk about what makes me laugh, makes me cry, makes me happy, makes me sad, or just really ticks me off. I don't know if I have scheduled live streams this week, but we will be doing musings, more House of the Dragon, Fire and Blood videos in the planning. I will not be on Sporking's Spork of Ice and Fire tomorrow night, but I don't know what I'm doing with my life. But those are some areas where you may or may not find me. And let me see what's in here. Oh, never mind. I was just looking at something in the private chat. So have a great day, everyone. Have a great day, and be certain to never go out in front of the lines when you're in the 19th century and you don't have flashlights.
Nope.